The Information Security Forum, ISF, has announced its forecast of the top 4 global security threats that businesses will face in 2017. In this series of 4 podcasts, ISF Managing Director Steve Durbin will provide his forecast on the risk these threats pose to businesses and how to manage them and even leverage them for business value. Crime as a service, government-sponsored terrorism, the global impact of data breaches, and insider threats are all on the threat landscape next year. The ISF has forecasted its 2017 security outlook for businesses to stay ahead and manage through. In this podcast, Steve Durbin examines those security threats, which the Information Security Forum has identified as prevalent in 2017. One of the most prevalent threats on the 2017 security horizon comes from the Internet of Things, IoT, as adding unmanageable risk. It's expected that some 28.4 billion devices will be connected in 2017. IoT devices, therefore, present a way in for attackers to get on the corporate network and to gain access to the device itself. We've all heard the worst-case scenario of hackers getting access and making a heart monitor device malfunction or a car drive off the road, which puts risk from IoT in a whole new light for companies trying to leverage IoT. Let's look at how IoT is, in fact, increasing the risk for many organizations that have IoT devices running on their networks. Steve, there is much discussion surrounding this Internet of Things and unmanaged risks. How do you identify risk, and what exactly do you see as the risks coming from IoT?
Yeah, good questions, Tavia. The Internet of Things is a really challenging area. Why do I say that? Well, first of all, because most of the devices that we have today connected to our networks from an IoT standpoint were never designed at all with security in mind. Quite the contrary, actually, because the push was always to try to get something working at a relatively low cost. Because if you think of what an IoT device might look like, as you said in the introduction, they tend to be fairly small, tend to be embedded in other devices themselves. So the challenge with IoT is they are hugely hungry. So they are connected to ever-increasingly fast networks. Gigabit connectivity is changing the way in which these devices communicate. So the whole essence of understanding where a device might be from a GPS standpoint perspective, what you might be doing if the device happens to be a wearable, sending that information, these all present security challenges, primarily because we've come to accept them. So we haven't looked at them as something that we need to secure. So from the organization standpoint, what exactly can you do? Well, there are some very simple steps that you can take. The first really is conducting an audit to understand what IoT devices you have connected to your network. Where are they? What are they doing? The next step is to look at what data they're accessing or indeed sharing. Did you know they were doing it? Does it make sense for them to do it? Have you provided the right level of permission for them to do it? Now, that's a little bit easier said than done, because, of course, these things have been around for a little while now. If you're starting with a clean sheet of paper, relatively simple. You can do all of these things. The third piece that you need to do, because they're sharing such a lot of information, is understand who that information is being shared with. So you're going to have to look at things like perhaps your third-party suppliers. You're going to need to look at really how they are embedded across the entire expanded infrastructure. And you're going to have conversations with third parties about what their security posture is as well for the use of IoT. So lots of different things to think about, but things that you can actually deal with and you can manage if you do take a fairly audit-based, process-based approach to these things.
Mm-hmm. With a huge increase in the flood of data being collected and exchanged between these devices and networks, what can businesses do to improve their security posture when it comes to IoT strategy?
I think it's about taking a very much a risk-based approach to it. So it's about conducting a risk assessment. You have to understand what information is being shared. That, for me, is the starting point and the end point, actually. Because what we're looking to do is to try to ensure that mission-critical assets that are moving around the organization are managed. So if you do have a significant number of IoT devices sharing data across your network, what data are they actually sharing? Let's make sure that the data that is being shared is being done knowingly rather than unknowingly. So a good risk assessment across all of the different elements of IoT, across all of the different elements of the network is, for me anyways, is a fundamental. You have to do that. Once you've done that, you'll have clarity as to exactly what's going on from a risk standpoint. And you can then put in place the right policies, processes, procedures that suit your organization. Very often people will say to me, well, is there one way of doing all of this kind of thing? The answer is no. There isn't, because every organization behaves in a different way. Every organization deals with data in a slightly different way. So make it appropriate to your organization and the resources that you have in place.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. How will the explosion of the Internet of Things impact privacy?
Now, that's a very good question. I mean, privacy is certainly something that is moving to the top of the concern list, if I could put it that way, because of a number of things that are going on in terms of things like the General Data Protection Regulation across the European Union, for instance. And it's a very big concern, mainly because, again, if we think back to what an IoT device might be, let's stick with wearables, for instance. Wearables today are picking up all sorts of information about you as an individual by design. That's why we're wearing them, right? We want to know how many steps we've walked. We want to know what our blood pressure is. We want to know how many calories we've consumed and all of this kind of thing, particularly if we're just about to walk past a coffee shop and fancy a muffin or whatever. Especially. But that information is also valuable to other people. And you may not want to have it disclosed. So you may not want to disclose, for instance, to your doctor that you have a little 4 o'clock muffin or whatever it might be. I'm using very simple examples.
Sure, this is about a friend. It's not about
exactly.
You.
I mean, that is the essence of it. My muffins come in at 4:30. But that really is the point. What we're trying to do is to ensure that we're managing data knowingly. So I go back to the point I was making earlier. Privacy is all about trying to preserve information or data that is important and applicable to an individual in a way that is appropriate. So I may choose to share my information. That's fine because I'm opting into it. However, having that information just widely shared with, say, my healthcare provider, my insurance company, may not be something that I particularly want to do. And so these are the sorts of issues that we have to contend with when we get into this area of privacy. And certainly with upcoming legislation, then we're going to have to spend very much more time, I think, thinking through exactly how we manage those elements of data. And as with most things technological, I guess, some of the things that we thought were probably some of the biggest benefits are going to present some real challenges to us later on.
It seems that along with all the innovation and the revenue it brings, IoT connectivity also has its fair share of risk if it's not managed properly. And it sounds like it is truly critical that companies understand the scale of IoT from a security perspective. For more information on the appropriate security frameworks to both secure and leverage your IoT strategy, please visit www.securityforum.org.